The Soviet Union, in its time, was one of the most powerful and feared nations in the world. Soviet rule over Russia and all of Eurasia lasted from 1917 to 1991. Many things happened in this period of 74 years, good and bad. The official beginning of the Soviet Union was on November 7, 1917, after the end of the Russian Revolution of 1917. At this point, it was called the Russian Republic. It wasn't until July 10, 1918, when the 1918 Constitution was drafted, was it called the Russian Socialist Federative Soviet Republic. After the Civil War in 1920, it was known by its most famous name, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR. The main political power at this time was the Bolsheviks, later known as the Russian Communist Party. After the revolution, the tensions were so high, a civil war started between the Bolshevik Red Army and the Allied White Army. After the long, bloody battles, the worst of the fighting took place between 1918 and 1920. It is estimated that nearly 9 million people died, putting it in around the top 10 most deadliest wars ever.
Throughout the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, the grain supply was fading throughout the growing country. This led to a lack of food and the need for more grain from outside sources. With the major increase of urban population in Soviet cities, grain was running scarce in the country. This resulted in a growing debt due to the use of one-third of the gold reserves being used to buy grain from outside countries such as Japan and China. International relationships were also a problem for the country, even from 1945, when American General George Patton, who was commander of the Third Army, said, "We promised the Europeans freedom. It would be worse than dishonorable not to see they have it. This might mean war with the Russians, but what of it? They have no air force anymore, their gasoline and ammunition supplies are low. I've seen their miserable supply trains, mostly wagons, drawn by beaten-up old horses or oxen. I'll say this. The Third Army alone, with very little help and with damned few casualties, can lick what is left of the Russians in 6 weeks. You mark my words, don't ever forget them. Someday we will have to fight them, and it will take 6 years and cost us 6 million lives." George Patton was wrong about the USSR and the United States going to war. They were coming close to war, however, in the 1960s. This was because of the Cold War between the United States and the USSR. In this period, tensions between the countries were at the highest levels in history. With the threat of nuclear attacks, President John F. Kennedy spoke at the American University in Washington, D.C. He said,
"The United States, as the world knows, will never start a war. We do not want a war. We do not now expect a war. This generation of Americans has already had enough, more than enough, of war and hate and oppression. We shall be prepared if others wish it. We shall be alert to try to stop it. But we shall also do our part to build a world of peace where the weak are safe and the strong are just. We are not helpless before that task or hopeless of its success."
As the 60s passed and the threat was diminishing, the two superpowers of the world were still in high tensions. This was seen as Leonid Brezhnev, who was the chairman of the President of the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union, says in 1979 that of late attempts have been made in the USA, at a high level and in a rather cynical form, to play the Chinese card against the USSR. This is a short-sighted and dangerous policy. The relationship with the United States was not a huge factor in the collapse of the nation. Their growing debt mainly led to the deterioration of the country. The exact date of the collapse can be traced to September 15, 1985. On this day, Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani, who was the Minister of Oil of Saudi Arabia at the time, announced that the country would alter its oil policy. Within the next 6 months, the production of oil increased fourfold, which sent oil prices spiraling down. With a drastic drop in oil, the Soviet Union lost approximately $20 billion a year. This much money, lost along with the increasing population and loss of grain, resulted in needed action from the government. Government officials eventually had 3 options to save the country. Option 1 consisted of getting rid of the Eastern European Empire and to stop barter trade in gas and oil with socialist bloc countries. It also included charging the current hard currency used in the country for the hydrocarbons, as well as convincing Soviet leaders to forget the results of World War II were included in this plan. Option 2 would have reduced Soviet imports by $20 billion. This was to balance out the loss from lost oil revenue. This would ultimately cause the country to enforce food rationing in the nation, similar to what was done during World War II. With this plan, Soviet officials realized that this wouldn't work and the country wouldn't even last for 1 month. So this idea was never really discussed. The final option, option 3, consisted of major cuts in the military-industrial complex. This, however, would possibly cause conflict with regional industrial elites. Conflict could possibly develop due to the large number of Soviet cities that had a high dependence on the military-industrial complex. Seeing all the possible complications, this idea was never really discussed. With all the options seeming unhelpful, the Soviet leadership decided to forget about the problems with hopes it would simply go away on its own. So instead of actual reform of the country, the Soviet Union started to borrow money internationally since the international credit rating was still strong. The major years of borrowing occurred between 1985 and 1988, with the economy eventually stalling out in 1989.
The economy of the superpower has been slowly deteriorating for years before it finally collapsed in 1991. After the collapse, many of the smaller countries adopted their own government. The collapse of the Soviet Union caused a drop in the average Russian male's life expectancy. The average day was changed dramatically, and some couldn't handle the political reform that emerged from the ashes of the Soviet Union. 10 years after Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as president of the Soviet Union, which led to the dissolution of the nation, not everyone was happy. Pyotr Alkyutov, who fought during the Battle of Stalingrad during World War II, keeps asking, "What was I fighting for?" He feels that his fighting was useless in the end, and he still mourns the passing of the nation from the New York Times. January 30th, 1991. The President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, stated in his State of the Union address that the end of the Cold War has been a victory for all humanity. A year and a half ago in Germany, I said that our goal was a Europe whole and free. Tonight, Germany is united. Europe has become whole and free, and America's leadership was instrumental in making it possible.